All right. Welcome everybody to the following RPA, Rabbinic Pastor Association training in conjunction with Ohala. And we are proud and honored to have and privileged to have our Rabbi Jeremy Sher, who is not only a good guy, but he knows all about evil in a good way. So take it away, Jeremy. Rabbi Jeremy.
Thank you, Laya. It's a real honor and privilege to be here teaching an RPA training. I, um, I can't say how touched I am that you asked me, and it's sort of quite a topic. Um, what I have to present today has been presented at Ohala before. I presented it 4 or 5 years ago and at a workshop at an Ohala conference, mainly to get people's feedback and to say, like, am I totally out in left field? Is this like even remotely Kabbalistically valid? People who know more than me and have read more than me, like, tell me if I'm completely off the deep end here, if this is way too far out, or, should I be teaching this stuff? And the feedback that I got. So when I present at Ohala, it's almost always to get feedback from people. It's and we can have this workshop in the same spirit. It's not so much that I'm sharing from a position of superior knowledge as it is. I just sort of like to hear what you think of what it is that I've come up with here. Um, but the feedback I got from Ohala colleagues, it must have been 2018 maybe that I did this, or 2017 or 18, sometime around then. People basically said, um, I'm not going to name names because the memory is a little bit fuzzy and I don't want to attribute the words to the wrong person, but people who sort of know about these things basically said, your stuff makes about as much sense as anybody else's, so go ahead and teach it. so so with their permission, with the permission of my esteemed and knowledgeable colleagues, I have this to share with you, and I'd love to hear what you think. Maybe you think it's way too far out there. I don't know. It's pretty far out there. Um, but before we before we get started, so I think people know I'm a chaplain. I work as a hospital chaplain in San Francisco, and I just would like to know, especially in the context of RPA, why do you all want to hear about evil?
Can I
We
just,
want to hear anything you have to teach, Jeremy.
of course, but here's a couple of things. One is I read a few months ago, maybe sometime last year, that good and evil has been around for since the beginning of creation. That the ideas of the good angels and the evil angels have been around. The other thing is that a few years ago I read a book called People of a Lie, and this is by M. Scott Peck, who is a psychiatrist that wrote The Road Less Traveled. It talks about how there are evil people in the world. And this is something that my partner and I have debated because her mother was from a privileged family. She was in a very loving, privileged family, and yet came out as alcoholic and abusive. And both of us wonder, where did this come from? What, how can someone who comes from such a background, no abuse in the family? I mean, just coming from British royalty, actually, how could it come down the lineage that this trauma can come down and to this one particular person? And then reading this book called People Who Love Dead Jews. Why are Jews so why do people attack us so much? So those are questions and what makes me curious about what you have to say, DeMarte.
Okay, thank you. That helps. mean, I teach a lot of things other than the evil stuff. So if you just wanted to hear me, I could have picked something else. But that makes sense. That's good to know. Anybody else? What brought you to, you heard the topic. It's not the most pleasant topic in the world. What sort of made you want to hear about this?
Well, number one, you were speaking. I wanted to hear what you had to say. Number two, what do I know about evil? I know about irritating. I know about nasty. I know, but I don't know if I know about evil personally.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll learn something. Yeah, Jay.
For me, I see so much evil in the world. I just see so much hate and so much pain and so much um, do suffering in others. And I, for a really, really long time, have never felt the amount of evil so palpable as I do now. And so that's in addition to supporting you and supporting Chaya and the Rabbinic Pastor Association is, one of the reasons that I came tonight to see.
Okay. Okay.
I have a very practical reason for being here. Ever since anti-Semitism has been raising its ugly head again, and especially since October 7th, I work with elders at facilities, and the Holocaust survivors that I work with. They don't have any questions. They don't really want to talk about it, but I don't know how to bring it up in a way that will speak to them. They're feeling a lot of fear right now.
Hmm.
I wonder if you could ask them, because surely they've looked back in their lives, and you could ask them, I bet that looking back, you've seen things you wished you had done, or you wished others had done, or you thought should have been done. What are they?
Yeah, no, I've had those conversations individually with people,
Mm.
but they don't want to talk in a group. They don't want some of the other people even to know that they were in concentration camps. So I'm here for the bigger picture as well to see where I can go with it. But yes, Eve, it's important to talk to people individually about what happened to them and what they learned from it and what they wish they had learned from it. And some of the stories are harrowing.
Yeah.
What they want us to learn from it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I also thank you, Matya and Eve. One of the things that's been bothering me, anti-Semitism as a Holocaust grandchild and daughter, that's like, and growing up in the South, that's just part of it. But what bothers me is guns that as soon as children are shot, we're still order more guns. I live in the most evil state imaginable in Florida. I just saw videos in Houston, Texas, where police are giving tickets to people who were feeding the poor and hungry.
Mm.
In Iowa, they're going to cut food programs to children. To me, this is evil. It used to be that if you fed the poor, if you opened up a soup kitchen, the police would actually come in and help you, ladle out the soup. Now they're giving tickets and preventing water to construction workers and immigrants. And to me, this is the epitome of evil. So I'm interested in what your take on that, Jeremy, is.
Yeah, that really reminds me of the story, of course, of Stom and Amora, the the idea of ticketing people who are giving out food to the poor. Um, yeah, uh, I think that this struggle is kind of the struggle of our time. It does feel to me, I'm 47 years old, so I'm not a kid, and I'm also kind of not in the Holocaust survivor generation. I'm sort of right in between there. But the times that I feel like I'm living through with, I was born in the Carter administration and Camp David and all of that, and it's just everything seems to have deteriorated so badly. Um, I feel like the struggle of our time is to know what we're up against and to try to analyze and make some sense of it so that it can be redeemed, because the world needs redemption so very badly. um, when I'll tell you, I mean, such a haskama I have for Moala. Your stuff makes about as much sense as everyone else's, so go ahead and teach it. That being such as it is, I'll go ahead and teach it. Um, my when I talk about evil, I mean moral evil, and I think what I mean by that is causing unnecessary suffering. Um, I don't mean disobedience. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with disobedience. One of the reasons I'm, in the Jewish renewal movement, and I'm not Orthodox at all. So,
Is it a virtue in the Jewish renewal movement?
what's that?
Isn't it a virtue?
Is it a virtue? It might be a virtue, disobedience. I mean, I think in some ways Reb Zalman set that example, and certainly doesn't kick people out who are disobedient. So, so I don't mean that. I don't mean sort of the failure to keep kosher and, and all of the rest of it. I'm not taking a position, good or bad, on kashrut or Shabbos or, any of that stuff. It's just not what I mean when I say evil. So we can talk about whether driving on Shabbat is good for the Jews or bad for the Jews, different workshop, right? But I'm talking about causing unnecessary suffering. And I've thought a little bit about sort of where that comes from and why, and crucially what we can do about it. I see Tikkun Olam as coming full circle. I just led a Tu B'Shvat Seder last night for this community that I'm working with in South Korea. That I think, I don't want to jinx it. I'm very excited about it, and I don't want to, say too much and jinx it. But we may end up with a Jewish renewal community in South Korea. So I, in any case, I did a Tu B'Shvat Seder for them. And I said the whole point of studying Kabbalah is to bring the Holy Shefa down to the world of Asiyah where it's needed. And I always say that when I do I do a Friday night service on the street with unhoused people every month, and I just did that last Friday. And it's the same thing, our entire job is to go up to the higher worlds and find the divine flow that's blocked, that the PSS or Rabbi said is blocked, and I think it's still blocked, and find it and get it and bring it down. So Tikkun Olam, of course, starts with Kabbalah and is about finding and elevating the sparks, right? And then it's sort of, a lot of people say, well, Tikkun Olam was redefined to mean social justice. But I think it's all part of the same cloth. I mean, so social justice is elevating the sparks. That's what it is. And the entire point of it, right? In Judaism, we're not trying to escape the world of Asiyah. We're not trying to float up into nothingness and lose ourselves, right? We're trying to improve the world of Asiyah. We're trying to connect what's been disconnected and to mend what's been broken, so that we can elevate the world of Asiyah, right? To me, this is the whole point. This is why we bother with the four worlds at all. The whole point is to make the world of Asiyah the place that it should be. And ultimately to bring about the redemption that we need. But I don't know that redemption happens all at once. I think redemption happens in little increments that, if we do enough of them, one spark at a time, then finally we get to, where we want to be, right? Um, but redemption is something that we can bring about in our spaces. Like I said, one spark at a time. So, I think it's important to sort of understand what's gone wrong in order to bring it back to where it should be. So that's my interest in evil. And if this makes any sense to you or is useful in any minor way, I'll be happy, right? So maybe it sparks your thoughts about evil and you go in a completely different direction than I did. Great, that's great too. I don't claim to have the answers. I just have one sort of set of thoughts about it. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning. I'm going to share my screen. And one of the nice things about a 2-hour workshop, thank you for giving me so much time, is that we do have time to get through this. Please do feel free to, interrupt with questions. I think we have time for all that. If I feel like we need to move on, I'll tell you, but I think we have enough time for discussion and everything. So, okay. Give me 1 second. I'm going to get this presentation up and share my screen. Slideshow, start from beginning. And start from beginning is a great option for the slideshow because that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start from the beginning. Okay. Oh dear. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. And where is this? Okay. Does everybody see Chesed Gevura on the other side?
No.
I'm sharing the right thing here.
The only thing we see, it says, oh, there you go, Zohar.
Okay, Zohar 115. So right, we're going to start right at the beginning. And this is the beginning. This is the Zohar's creation story. And this is an excerpt from my book, actually. I wrote a book on Jewish nonprofit governance, and this was my first shiur of the book. So, we're starting with the dark spark. So before the dark spark, everything was possible and nothing was actual, right? Everything was possible and nothing was actual. And the dark spark, nobody knows what the dark spark is. My view of the dark spark that I've been playing with is that the dark spark is the first collapse of possibilities into actuality. So possibilities go out to make room for something to be real. So when everything's possible, nothing's real. And God's first creation is to create all the possibilities. But then after that, the rest of creation is artistic, is like sculptural creation. We chip possibilities off the sculpture, just as an artist chips marble off the sculpture to make the sculpture. And they die. And by dying, by collapsing, they make room for one thing to be real at a time. People, am I making any sense here? Okay. Eve, are you saying something? You're on mute.
Sorry, I said you're on your way somewhere.
Okay.
Just following you.
Well, we're on our way together. So that's the dark spark. Oops. Oh, this is an old version. So, yeah, so I think what happens here is that um, uh, first all possibilities are created, and then we start chipping them off, right? And I think that might be the difference between Bria and Yetzirah. Um, and when the dark spark happens, um, the Shefa in the 10 Sfirot has reached Gevura, because it's only in Gevura that scarcity becomes a thing, right? There's no scarcity above Gevura. Gevura is the place where you have to choose one thing over another. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, right? You have to choose what flavor of ice cream you want if you're going to get any ice cream at all. Um, and the point is that in order to create anything, we have to choose what we want to be over what we don't want to be. We have to choose what we want over what we don't want. And there's something that might be a little sad about that. There are possibilities that are going out, things that could have been that are not going to be, because um, we've chosen our path, right? Um, so um, if you make a mistake, it can't be undone, right? We can't go back and turn back time and redo the decisions we've made and go down a different branch of the tree of possibility, right? That branch is gone, right? What we can do is we can make decisions from where we are. And, if there's a mistake that we feel we've made, we can kind of sculpt that mistake into something that might be even more beautiful by making artistic decisions from here on out in the future, right? But we can't go back and undo something that we've done, right? Once we chip the possibility off the block, it's gone. Okay? So that's the beginning. Okay, I'm going to skip that slide. That's an interesting slide, but I'm going to skip it. The only thing I want to point out on this slide, I got this from the conservative movement's Tanakh that they Eitz Chaim. It's on one of the pages of Eitz Chaim, and I just want to point out that Gevurah is where the Zohar tells us that that evil attaches itself to the tree, right? It's not that Gevurah is evil. That's a big, big mistake. There's nothing wrong with Gevurah at all, and you need Gevurah in order to get to Tiferet, where we want to be, right? But evil kind of attaches itself somewhere within the Sephirah of Gevurah. There's that attachment point to the other side. And it's identified with Isaac, which sort of bothers me because I do a lot of thinking about the Akedah. And I think if we want to think about evil, we have to think about the Akedah and where it comes from and why. Okay, so we already talked about this. So here we go. Why are we pinning the other side on Isaac? Isaac is the victim of the Akedah. Shouldn't we be pinning the other side on Abraham? Where does it sort of go wrong? There's something unfair, right? The concept of fairness comes into play. There's something unfair about choosing what we want over what we don't want, right? One path is favored, the other path is disfavored. There's nothing wrong necessarily with the disfavored path. There could be, but there maybe not. But we can only have one or two flavors of ice cream at the same time, right? So what about the chocolate that we didn't get, right? There's something unfair about it. In Gevurah, where there are scarcity, there are winners and losers for the first time, right? We don't have that concept in the Sefirot above, but when it comes down, when the Shefa comes to Gevurah, suddenly now there's scarcity, there's decisions that have to be made. You can only have one thing at a time. And as a result, the concept of winners and losers comes in here. The drama of this subtractive creation, to me, is dramatized by the continual type scene of sibling rivalry in the book of Genesis. So the book of Genesis has all sorts of different permutations of sibling rivalry. Cain and Abel, you all know them. From Cain and Abel down to Joseph and his brothers. And interestingly, like Ephraim and Manasseh even have this, there's some rivalry there. It's not developed in the text, but, Jacob wants to put his hand on the, he wants to put his right hand on the head of the eldest, and Joseph says, no, it's the other way, right? So even there's this idea that only one of them can get the right hand blessing and the other one has to get the left hand blessing. So both of them are blessings, but presumably the right hand blessing is better than the left hand blessing. And that's the way Genesis just takes us through over and over and over iterations of that story, right? There isn't enough innermost blessing for both children. One child has to be favored and the rest of the children are not as much favored, right? Over and over and over again in the book of Genesis. And I want to suggest that this is a among other things, right? It's a dramatization of the truth that the world is created by chipping off possibilities. And I should say the world is co-created by chipping off possibilities. And only one child can get the blessing. The fact that only one child can get the blessing is symbolic of the fact that only one decision gets to be actualized in the tree of possibility. And there's a lot of drama there. Like the book of Genesis is fabulous at giving us the emotional content of that, and really personifying it and letting us experience the whole depth, the emotional depth of that drama. But there's an unfairness there. There's a scarcity, and someone has to get a better blessing than the rest. Right? Be one thing if Genesis were all about all the children getting the same blessing, right? But that's not what Genesis is about, right? And I think one of the things it's trying to tell us is that this sense of unfairness that strikes me as unfair bothers me. But this asymmetry is a necessary condition of the world, and it goes all the way back to the dark spark. Right? The asymmetry in outcomes goes all the way back to the dark spark. And every asymmetry, every winner and loser pair in the future dramatizes and really underscores the original concept of scarcity that I think is represented by the dark spark. Okay. So it can't be any other way. There has to be asymmetrical outcomes. There has to be asymmetrical blessings. Just a fact about the world. It can't be otherwise. As the world is created. Maybe not as the world is redeemed, but as the world is created. Okay, am I making any sense here so far? Okay. Let's see. Next slide. Oh, yes, here we go. We're getting into the evil stuff. This is my warning from Albertus Magnus. I do a lot of work on demons, by the way. So the evil thing, just I guess a story about my interest in it. I feel like I've experienced evil to an extent in my lifetime, and we'll talk about that a little bit. That motivated me to think about this. I've certainly witnessed a lot of evil, being a chaplain, and being a rabbi, and in other ways. And I also have kind of a niche research interest in demon possession, which intersects with evil in interesting ways. It's not clear to me that the demons are all evil. Some of them may be. But as I work with mental health patients who complain about demonic possession, I have an article out about this that's a fun read. It's called Chaplain, Can You Do an Exorcism? If you haven't read it, it's fun to read. People like that article. But I developed a clinical approach to patients in the psychiatric inpatient unit who complain to the chaplain about demon possession. And they're certainly working with evil in ways that are often subtle, often different from one another, and certainly not often unexpected. So I feel like I've kind of, evil is a topic that just sort of keeps coming up in my career. So it's something that I've been thinking about. Okay. So here is the passage from Danny Matt's 1983 translation of the Zohar, where evil comes into the picture. And I'm just going to read the bold part. The secret of secrets, the secret of secrets, out of the scorching noon of Isaac, out of the dregs of wine, a fungus emerged, a cluster, male and female together, red as a rose, expanding in many directions and paths, and so on. Powerful poetry. Danny Matt told me that he thinks he made a mistake translating the word as fungus. He wouldn't translate it fungus today. And I feel obligated to say that because I love this fungus idea. I love this translation, even though Danny Matt himself later said that it probably doesn't mean fungus, and his later translation has a different word there. I forgot what he went with. So with that caveat, I actually love the fungus, and so I kind of kept it here. And I went to his 1983 translation just because it's so powerful at the price of, in Danny Matt's greater learning since 1983 not being perhaps quite correct academically. There's something wrong that happens in the Sephirah of Gevurah. Something goes wrong. Not the whole thing, but something goes wrong. And this illness, right, this infection attaches to it there. So the Sephirot gets sick in Gevurah. There's disease. There's this infection, this fungal infection that comes into the picture. Something has gone wrong, and now there's disease, right? I think it's a useful way to think about it. The poetry here is just striking. The scorching noon of Isaac. Gosh, I don't have. Oh yeah, the Aramaic is right there, right? It does kind of say the tukufa or tukpa. I'm sorry, I'm not an Aramaic scholar, but that word from tokef in Hebrew is what he translates as noon, and it's like a pure noon. It's an absolute noon. It's like a solar noon where the sun is right at the zenith. And Isaac there is the code word for the Sephirah of Gevurah, right? But it's also Isaac the person. And so something has happened at the, I'll use the Hebrew, the Tukufah of Isaac, the solstice of Isaac. Something has happened there. And the dregs of wine, the rejected, right? That which is garbage. That's where the disease comes from. Okay. Any reactions or discussion on this? This is one of our important source texts. Yeah, Chaya.
I was intrigued that that Laura Dewin Kaplan, when she was writing her book Monkey, The Mouth of the Donkey, she translated Chava as snake. So I'm like thinking about that passage as I'm reading this from you.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the whole snake in the Garden of Eden is so interesting, right? Um, yeah, Eva, you're on mute again. Eve, you're on mute again.
Remembering that the meaning of the name Chava is life.
Right. Chava, life.
Chava is life. And the relationship with snake, because in so many cultures, snake has to do with the energy that goes up and down the spine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And consciousness, the different stages and shifts of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, it's just so rich. I mean, you know, this the 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 creation story, the snake in the Garden of Eden, and this all of this stuff is just so rich. Um,
Could I say a little something? This is
yeah.
Lisa Sokolow, and I'm driving, so I can't see anything.
Oh,
But what I think when I'm hearing all this, and I'm hearing about the nature of Gavura and limit, I think about this being an essential nature of entering into time, into the horizontal. The snake in Eden is on the horizontal. It's not the eternal snake. And that as we enter time and as we enter choice, that movement from eternal to time necessitates the creation of this either or in the moment, which then becomes a root of evil. Those are the thoughts that are going through my head as I hear you.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I would say the either or is not the root of evil, but something goes wrong with the either or, right? It's possible for it to not go wrong. And a lot of the time it doesn't go wrong, right? Um, I mean, there are either ors everywhere we look because that's the way the world is. We live down here in the world of Asiya underneath all this stuff, and we get the Shefa filtered through all of these Sfirot. Um, so very often the either or doesn't go wrong. So you got to have it. You can't deny it, right? But sometimes it goes wrong. And it's the first place where it can go wrong because there's no either or above this. So so yeah, that's I think that's very interesting. Okay. Okay. So here's my sort of uh, teleology, I guess. Um, the there's a seed of something wrong in original creation, right? The disease comes from somewhere. And it has to be digested by time. That's what history is. That's why we find ourselves here. It's not that God is guaranteed to triumph in the end. It's not that God is working on triumphing, which is the process theology take. It's that God triumphing is what history is. It's not that it takes time, it's that it is time. And so we have this process of fermentation, right? Wine is called chamra in the passage. And that root has to do with fermentation, right? Wine is fermented. And I think the process of anger is important to this process. So there's nothing wrong with anger. There's something that goes wrong that anger is part of, but there's nothing wrong with anger itself. Anger is important to the digestion process that renders this dangerous infection into something that is ultimately redemptive. Okay. So Gevura is the first Sephirah to cause change, right? Change happens. This either or is the process of causing change. And change begins to happen in Gevura. And is, I'll just read this, is therefore essential to the drama of God finally establishing sovereignty. But Gevura can also create its own evil through the same process. Okay, so you need it. You need the either or. You need the anger. Anger is, I just played with the word machmir. It's severe, and it ferments the wine. Okay, so it's not that it's bad. It's that it can go bad, but you also need it in order to bring about a great good, which is the redemption of the world. Okay. I should say that I highly recommend the book, The Creation and the Persistence of Evil by my grad advisor, John Levinson. If we have time, I'll go. I've moved so many times that my library is totally disorganized, and most of the time I know where the books are, but I may have to just sort of look on the shelves for it. But the book is called Creation and the Persistence of Evil by John Levinson, Levenson. It's a short book. It's a quick read, and I recommend it. It was very influential on my sort of theology and teleology. I don't think Levinson would agree with all that I'm saying here, and I think he'd think I'm crazy. He does think I'm crazy, as a matter of fact, which is one of the reasons he seems not to like me anymore. He thinks I'm a little nuts. But his book was very influential on my thinking, so I do recommend that book. Okay, here we go. Here's some poetry I've written. I'll just read this poem for you. What far away they call the scorching noon, the sun above the knife above the neck. The shadow of the blade has taken life already. O God, where is the ram, that Father might kill it instead of, no, I can't say it. Dreadful is ability to speak at times like this. If I were just a ram, incapable of words to pour the soul, without the hope of changing Father's mind, it would be easier to make my peace with filicide. O God, where is the ram? The shadow of the point upon the neck has killed already. O God, there's no need to follow through. The shadow of the point has taken one for being under it, has killed another, for the murderer is dead already. O God, where is the ram? A third will die of grief before the day of scorching noon is over, and a fourth, abandoned long ago and left to die, rides with bow of pain and arrows hewn from valid grievances. In devastation each our own, with eyes so streaked with tears that none can see through blinding sun at noon, we seek, but not together, each alone, the ram, O God. And isn't there a ram this time? A scapegoat? Someone else to kill? A life less loved or worthy than our own? The shadow of the blade grows on the neck and focuses its lines to noon's precision. The sun aligns. The shadow of the point remains always exactly where it was, locked in precise position on the vein where flows the blood of life to feed the brain, the fragile miracle within the head, the wonder that a sacrifice can praise, the hope that hope itself might not be dead, that murder incomplete might so remain forevermore until the end of days. So what if anything do you get from that? Was that worth reading?
Well, when you think about taking a life today, in our society today. Sacrificing the lamb
Right.
wouldn't be a good choice. And I think that it's saying that killing and sacrificing other life is never a good choice, no matter what life it is.
Yeah. So I'm really, because Isaac is identified with Gevurah, and Gevurah is not identified with, we have to be careful, but the point that the Sephirah that gets sick of the disease of evil. I've just always been fascinated with Isaac's perspective on the Akedah.
Jeremy, what I was thinking of is when you were talking about the ram and scapegoat, I was thinking about Aaron during Yom Kippur, that he had to take the people's so-called sins and put it to the scapegoat and the scapegoat went off the cliff and the other goat went free. So I'm as I'm studying Torah, I think that there's a correlation between the stories in Genesis and what happens in the books from Exodus on.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. I don't have too much sympathy for Abraham's position in the Akedah. Like, everybody has nice things to say about Abraham. He's such a good father. The hell he is.
But we didn't hear him protest, did we?
No, not this time. He protests in the destruction of Sodom, but not here. The story went as it went, right? And I think Reb Chaya has a point that it influences future stories and the whole scapegoat, right? The line that there are two things that really stick out in my mind about this poem. One of them is, isn't there a ram this time? Right? The story goes by as it goes in the book of Genesis. But when we stand honestly before God, there's no ram this time, right? No, there isn't. And the knife, there's a happy ending to the story in the Bible because they couldn't leave it the way it was. But I think when we stand before God in honesty, the knife is still suspended over Isaac's neck and stays there forever. Forever. And the best hope we have, murder incomplete has already been committed. Abraham's a murderer as far as I'm concerned. But the best hope that we have is that it stays incomplete. Can't take it back. And Abraham and Isaac never talk again, right? That's the end of their relationship. They never say a word to each other again. But the best hope we have is that the knife stays there, motionless, suspended forever until the final redemption.
I've been listening to you and then realizing that I've been hearing melody in the background. And what have I been hearing? Leonard Cohen's Song of Isaac.
Yeah. It's really worth paying attention to Isaac, right? Isaac's perspective doesn't ever get heard, right? I was hearing about how virtuous Abraham is that he didn't withhold his son. Not too many people tell Isaac's side of the story, right?
What we hear later about Isaac is that he's blind.
That's right.
And if you fantasize backwards, you can imagine him flinching away from the knife and closing his eyes.
and never opening them again. Yeah. Wow. 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 Yeah. Never opening them again. As far as Isaac's concerned, the knife is still there. Right? Abraham's probably moved on. Sarah's dead. But as far as Isaac's concerned, there was no taking that back. Right? That decision was made, and it stays there forever. And so, and that's sad, but there's also hope there, right? We're this close to the knife crashing back down, but it doesn't have to. It hasn't yet, and it doesn't ever have to.
But
And
it
we can.
continues, Jeremy, it continues throughout the book of Genesis. It's not until Moses and Abraham and Miriam come into the picture that the whole idea of sibling, the intergenerational trauma ends. So
Right.
it continues in how we look at it from a present day perspective, that how many parents sacrifice their children,
Right.
the altar of greed or guns or
Right.
resources that they prefer to have for themselves.
Right. And that's what this really is about. The next poem is also about Isaac. This one I wrote when I was probably 21. It was about my coming out as bisexual at a time that was still sort of before society was changing, but hadn't really changed yet, and it was still sort of before that was acceptable. So my father, he tried to kill me. I guess he made me wrong. It all happened on the mountain, and that's why I wrote this song. It's the song of a kid who was wrong somehow. It's a song of a kid who would be dead now if a ram hadn't gotten in the way. Oh, and father, he comes with the slaughtering knife. I choke back my tears and my eyes turn to gray. Father, he comes to take my life away. I don't know why he did it. I guess the mountain makes him mad. He says he heard these voices. Oh, the man I once called Dad. He brought me up to the top of the hill and tied me like an animal that he would kill, and he came at me with his knife pointed my way. Oh, and father, he comes with the slaughtering knife. I choke back my tears and my eyes turn to gray. Father, he comes to take my life away. Oh, cursed is that mountain. I'm not going there again, for that is where I almost died and thought I would die when an angel said to Father, don't kill him. I was glad, but if anyone showed mercy, it was God and not my dad. Oh, and Father, he comes with the slaughtering knife. I choke back my tears and my eyes turn to gray. Father, he comes to take my life away. So that was actually a poem about my coming out. But so I've kind of identified with Isaac for a long time. But you know, Isaac's side of the story, what do you all think?
You know, I don't remember hearing any Isaac side of the story except that one song that Judy Collins sings.
Mm-hmm.
Are there more? Are there more that we can?
I have very little to offer on that. I have these two poems I wrote. I mean, sometimes it's poets who are willing to tell Isaac's side of the story.
Yeah.
Right.
So Rabbi Mitch Shefetz says that, I think it's Nishmat, the prayer Nishmat, the embedded in that prayer is the connection between Isaac, the love story between Isaac and Rebecca. And that's, and the other thing was that Isaac spent his life pursuing Abraham's dream by unplugging the wells, digging up the wells that were plugged back in between Abraham's death and Isaac understanding what his father was doing. so, and I always thought of Isaac as just a bridge. How do we get from Abraham to Jacob and Esau, and then a bridge to Joseph and his brothers and sister to get to Egypt, to the liberation story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I think that, if we want to understand how the Sephirah of Gevurah gets sick, I think it's just important to understand Isaac and what Isaac is dealing with and what Isaac is faced with. Isaac is definitely, um, among many other things, a lover, an unplugger of wells. Isaac is many things, but one of the things Isaac is that he just can't seem to get rid of is he's a victim. Um, he's the victim of his father, and that's the first time. It's not the first time there's been a victim. Abel is a victim, right? Um, but it's the first time it's happened quite that way. Um, and Abel doesn't live long enough to have a story developed about him. Hevel, breath, right? He's here and he's gone. But Isaac ends up having this story developed about him. And Isaac becomes identified with Gevurah.
And Isaac goes blind.
And Isaac goes blind, right? Yeah, I picked up on that in this poem. I never really sort of noticed that, but what you mentioned sort of comes out here in this poem, that Isaac is going blind. Yeah. Yeah.
I have another thing that I think about, which
Yeah.
is in terms of saying that Abel is the first victim. Abel is the one who first sacrificed an animal.
Mm.
Right after God says, I give you the earth to take care of and you'll eat vegetables. And then Abel kills an animal and burns it, and God smells it and becomes, wow, flesh. And I always wonder about the karmic moment, and that maybe Abel is actually not, yeah. So I think about that, yeah.
That's so interesting, yeah.
On this moment that God, who has just said we're plant eaters, gets a whiff of flesh, and what that does in terms of the forward movement, that actually Abel may not be the first innocent victim, because he himself took the life of a living creature and said, hey, God, do you want that?
So
and God was like, oh, wow, yes, I do.
Yeah. So it was the animal who was the first victim, yeah. Wow. Yeah. So to mention John Levinson again, I'm really a fan of his. Like I said, he doesn't like me anymore, but I really like his work. He has another book called the Death and Resurrection of the Beloved Son, and in that book he argues, among other things, that the Akedah, we teach third graders in Sunday school that the Akedah is the Torah's rejection of human sacrifice, right? But Levinson says, no, the opposite is true. There's no rejection of human sacrifice there. Abraham is praised for his willingness to engage in human sacrifice. And what happened was, historically, animal sacrifice slowly replaces human sacrifice over a period of centuries. And the animal sacrifices are significant precisely because they symbolize the human sacrifices that we no longer do. It's not because we think human sacrifice is bad. It's because, if anything, we're, just not willing to do it anymore. But the animal sacrifices, the whole animal sacrificial cult symbolizes that. And if we thought it was so bad, we wouldn't want something that symbolized it. Levinson says it a lot better than I am, and it's been a while since I've read the book, but um, the death and resurrection of the beloved Son. Okay. So here are some axioms about the Sefirot. This is not the traditional system, because in the traditional system, there's another side to all 10 of the Sefirot. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think there's any other side to the 3 higher Sefirot. Maybe there is. If you want there to be another side, fine. So there's another side. I'm not dealing with it. Okay. And Chesed is sort of a special case that we'll get to. But the flow, the illness comes in Gevurah, and the other side filters down from there. So, so that's where the other side attaches to the tree, and you know, it's okay if you want there to be a Sitra Achra of Keter. I just don't know anything about that. Maybe I shouldn't say there isn't one, but that's not something I know anything about. But you know, I'll deal with the 7 lower Sefirot. And Chesed has kind of a bad mirror image. It doesn't have a, you know, like I said here, the whole idea of sides or sidedness doesn't make sense in Chesed. Chesed doesn't have sides. Chesed overflows boundaries. But it does have sort of an image that's reinterpreted through bad Gevurah. So we'll take a look at that. And we can have imbalances between Chesed and Gevurah, but imbalances are not evil yet. They're dangerous because they can give rise to evil, but they're not evil yet. They're unfortunate, and they need to be corrected. Okay. Soon we're going to get to what I call the crazy diagram. Okay. Now may apparent be to thee how hidden the truth is from those people who aver all love is in itself a laudable thing, because its matter may perchance appear aye to be good, but yet not each impression is good, albeit good may be the wax. So not all frightening things are bad, not all pleasant things are good. There are pleasant things that are bad, and there are frightening things that are good. Okay. Okay, so here are some sort of schematic diagrams. Or I have Chesed in white, Gevurah in red, and Tiferet in purple. And where they're crossed out, that's like the Sitra Achra of them. And there are these words. Well, we'll talk about words in a minute, but there are words that bring you to different places. Okay, so here's my crazy diagram. Okay, so you have to start over here in the top right because this is Hebrew and it goes right to left. So Chesed starts up here. So we have God's love is abundant in creation. The creation of all possibilities happens, and then you get to Chesed. And here's the dark spark. And the dark spark is our bridge to Gevurah. And suddenly we have scarcity. Only one possibility can become actual, symbolized by sibling rivalry in Bereshit. And so you have the concept of choice for the first time, and the concept of victors and sufferers. And that gives rise to the first moral choice in the story. And that is essentially the victor and the sufferer both have a choice, the first moral choice. And the The way the victor goes wrong is something that I call the contempt of the strong for the weak. The contempt of the strong for the weak. People have to be blamed for their suffering because that makes the world seem fair. And so instead of recognizing that we have responsibilities to compassion and empathy, when we engage in the contempt of the strong for the weak, our soul utters a word of curse. And the word of curse brings us to the other side. When we engage in the contempt of the strong for the weak, our soul utters a word of curse. And the word of curse brings us to the other side. Okay? The way to avoid that, the way to get where we want to be, is to engage in compassion and empathy for those who suffer more than we do. Because those righteous choices bring us down to the balance between Chesed and Gevurah, the Tiferet, and the further flow down to to Malchut and the world of action, which is where we want the flow to go. So by engaging in righteous choices, we can help things go down as they should. But by engaging in wrong moral choices, which I think the contempt of the strong for the weak is one of them, that's where the illness comes in. And we end up where we don't want to be. Okay? The sufferer also has a choice. The sufferer's choice is, these are words that your soul can utter. The soul word, I suffered, therefore you should not suffer, is a righteous word and helps us engage in the righteous choices that make the shefa go where it should go. But the sufferer's curse, the soul word, I suffered, therefore you should suffer, is a curse word. And that brings the person to the other side. So both the victor and the sufferer have a moral choice. And they can either say a word of righteousness or a word of curse. And the word of righteousness brings us where we want to be. And the word of curse brings us to the other side. I call this my crazy diagram. You can sort of see why. Okay. So the other side is all about power for its own sake. I mean, we see this all over the place in the world today. Might makes right. What you're going to find in environments that are that have gone to the other side is you're going to find cynicism about morality. So Putin does this all the time, for example. So does Netanyahu, by the way. But Putin is constantly doing this. The West's morality is hypocritical, and therefore there's no such thing as morality. That is like Putin's whole message, and he is constantly doing that. So that's one warning sign that you're over in the territory of the other side. So then we get to bad chesed, which is, like I said, it's sort of a mirror image reflected through bad gevurah. It's not really the bad side of chesed, it's just sort of an image. And it's predicated on the contempt of the strong for the weak, and it emerges as love and kindness only for a favored in-group. So, forbearance, deference, bailouts, ignoring offenses for the powerful. Powerful people get impunity, and people who are not powerful get stepped on. But you know what? If you're powerful, it's so nice. It's so nice to be in that environment of bad chesed, because everybody's nice to you. And that's why I call it a gated community of niceness. So gated communities of niceness are one of the manifestations of the bad version of chesed. And you see this in Jewish renewal. right? You see this where people are saying, don't do Gevurah. Gevurah is bad, right? Gevurah is not bad. Gevurah is what brings us to Tiferet. Um, but people say, oh no, you can't talk about that. You can't say that. Um, don't attack the reputation of such and such an amazing teacher because maybe he engaged in very serious and terrible crimes, right? Um, that kind of attitude is what I call a gated community of niceness, because who's being kept out of the gated community? A lot of people are being kept out of the gated community, right? Have you ever encountered a gated community of niceness? Is that something that you sort of understand from your own experience?
Yes. Yes. I many years ago, I went to a NOW meeting. Does everyone know what NOW is or was? No, I don't know. It still exists, but that is definitely a gated community of niceness.
Hmm.
I was asked to leave because I made a comment that they didn't agree with. So I got up and walked out. But that they are definitely a gated community of niceness.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, unfortunately, this is pretty common, right?
Yeah.
This happens a lot, but that's one example where you were in a gated community of niceness, right? And you know it was a gated community of niceness because you were kicked out of it,
Yeah.
right? Gated communities of niceness are always kicking people out. Um, and the easiest way to become aware that you're in one is to be the one who's kicked out, because then it's very obvious to you, right? Um,
I never thought of that the wording you use, the gated community of niceness, but boy, does that fit.
yeah, yeah, yeah. How about anyone else ever been in a gated community of niceness? Yeah, Chaya. I bet there are a lot of them in Florida.
Oh, yeah. But my employer created a gate of niceness while they discriminated against me because I was a woman. Well, actually a lesbian. And discriminated because of age. So I was denied a promotion because of those issues, even though I was probably qualified to do the job of promotion.
Mm-hmm.
You could do something else. You can be a rabbi or a rabbinic pastor. That's good. You could do that, but you can't lead a department that you helped
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah. And you find that actively in a lot of religious organizations, churches, even a synagogue that we know of uh, has practiced that. And I never would have thought of the words you used, but they are absolutely perfect for an explanation of that.
Yeah. You know, a rabbi was one of the addressees of the letter from a Birmingham jail. Letter from a Birmingham jail was addressed to 4 white clergy, and one of them was a Reform rabbi.
Wow.
He's actually not such a bad guy. He had done a lot for interracial understanding, but he was on the wrong side of the letter from a Birmingham jail. Right? So our whole history is fraught with gated communities of niceness.
Yeah, yeah.
Has anyone ever been in a gated community of niceness that you became aware was one, but you were not actually a person who was kicked out of it? Where you became aware of, for example, your privilege?
Well, I think being white is just kind of that falls into that category, just being a white person.
Yeah, for sure. For certain, right? Um, Being a white person in America, absolutely, is a gated community of niceness.
Yeah,
It's enforced, right? You're not supposed to say things that, that interfere with the gatedness of the community, right?
right, right. And you're not supposed to see anyone who isn't as being as human as you are.
Right, right. I had a hospital patient on Friday share with me her racist views about African Americans. Um, and this happens from time to time in the hospital. And sometimes when it happens, I just end the visit, and I say, we don't talk that way in UCSF, and this visit is over, and I leave the room. Other times I don't. Um, and, you know, Probably the right thing to do would be to do that every time so that the person gets a message that what they're saying is just not okay. Um, and I'm not required, I don't have to, I also deal with patients who are anti Semitic and they share that with me. Or they try to convert me to evangelical Christianity or something. Um, you know, and Sometimes it's knowing that I don't have an obligation to be in the room that allows me to stay in the room a minute longer just to see what happens. But yeah, Chaya, you were going to say something.
In the Holocaust community, there's a hierarchy. First of all, I would often hear, a, a, a bad word for the African Americans who would come in and help the survivor with, their shopping or their activities of daily living. But I've actually had survivors tell me, oh, he's from Russia. He doesn't matter. Why is he getting all the money? He shouldn't have to get that money. Or, hidden children weren't as bad as those people who were in concentration camps. So there's this hierarchy of the people in the camps were the best, need the money, and they're the most needy, and then the hidden children, and then oddly enough, people from the former Soviet Union were on the other side.
Yeah, interesting.
So that was part of the privilege. And then the other privileged community is being Jewish in a Jewish community, because then, there's that hierarchy of, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, and Chabad.
Right. Yeah, right. That's right. And speaking of the Jewish community, I'm a citizen of Israel. Um, I just came from an Israeli peace rally that was organized by Israelis, which I was so excited about it that I went last week. I didn't look at I was so excited I didn't look at the flyer carefully, and I went like last Sunday, and nobody was there, and nobody was there. I looked at my email and said, oh, it's next week. Um, this T-shirt I'm wearing, I got at a protest in Jerusalem, some kind of a hafgana, like 10 years ago, and it says "Kamocha ger hayiti ba'aretz zara." Like you, I was a stranger in a strange land, um, and so I wore that. But you know, goodness knows there are gated communities of niceness in the Middle East. I'll just leave it there. Um, and sometimes we're not allowed to talk about them, right? Because we live in a gated community of niceness. But you have to remember that people have rights. And I have this kippah that I made myself. That it's in the style of a nanach kippah, but it's not a nanach kippah. It says "Zu zechu zechuyot ha'adam." I made it myself, human rights, because I want to remind myself that that's important. Um, and sometimes it takes reminding because I forget like the rest of us forget. It's nicer not to. Right? So that's a gated community of niceness. Okay. The sufferer also has curse words that they say. And the sufferer's curse takes these three forms: vindictive fantasizing. We've certainly seen a lot of that in the world recently. we see people taking out abuse on third parties. People who think they're, abuse is something you should take from above and inflict below, and that leads to all kinds of terrible things. And people who internalize the wrong and believe that they deserve it or else inflict it on their children, and perpetuate wrong that way. So these are people. The third one is people who believe that they are contemptible because they have received contempt. And that's a curse too. That's a curse too. So the winner and the loser both have a moral choice here, right? The righteous choice is to say, I'm just like you, react with compassion and empathy if you're in a position of privilege. Or if you're in a position of suffering, the righteous choice is, I suffered, therefore you should not suffer. Well, I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else. Instead of saying, I suffered, therefore you should suffer, which is a curse, right? So both parties here have a choice. The contempt of the strong for the weak is tempting partly because it is a theodicy. Does that make sense? It is an answer to the problem of evil. Sufferers deserve to suffer because they're worse people. It is an answer to the problem of evil. And that is why, that's one of the reasons it's so enticing. So one of the roots of racism in the United States.
You see some of the theories of reincarnation as a sort of extension of this?
I mean, I guess so, yeah. I don't want to be too judgmental of other religions without having studied them carefully.
It's in our own.
Yeah, well, to the extent that it is, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Right. Nobody deserves to suffer, and nobody deserves to enjoy. Nobody deserves anything. That to me is the answer, the good answer, a good answer, maybe I shouldn't say to the problem of evil. And that is the answer that's given by God to Job in the book of Job. And I've used that with hospital patients before.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Nobody deserves to suffer. Nobody deserves to enjoy. Nobody deserves anything. And that's the answer to Job's problem of evil that God gives to Job in Job chapter 38. It's not a question of deserving. It's a question of necessity. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, I appreciate that reference, Jeremy. And I'm also thinking about the very end of Job, where he gets recompensed with a new family. So I'm wondering if the bestowal of a new family is in some ways God's quote unquote reward for all of the suffering that Job had experienced.
Well, I think it's intended that way. We could do a whole other session on the Book of Job. I took a very interesting class on it in divinity school from Michael Coogan, who was the chair of the editorial committee of the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, if I'm not mistaken. Really, really nice guy. Michael Coogan, my first day at Harvard Divinity School, it was my first day at school, my first day as a grad student. Professor Coogan is teaching about Job, and he starts with, Job 1:1, that Job is Tamim v'yashar. And Coogan translated Tamim as perfect. And so I raised my hand and I said, it doesn't mean perfect. It means, if anything, blameless.
Mhm.
And but nobody's perfect. The point is, Job hasn't done anything so wrong that he deserves what happens to him, right? But it's not that Job is perfect. So Coogan engaged me in like a 20-minute back and forth on whether tamim means perfect or blameless
Mhm.
in front of the whole class. Not once did that man pull rank. He did not say that he's the chair of the editorial board of a well-known version of the Bible, and he picked that word. Thank you very much. Um, he made time and space for a first day, not just a first year, but a first day grad student to talk with him for 20 minutes about the translation of that word. I still don't think it means perfect, but I do think that Michael Coogan is a mensch. And,
Yeah.
you know, I wish there were more teachers like him. He's fabulous. He taught a fabulous class on Job.
Mhm.
Um, and
Okay.
so we could talk about Job a whole nother time. I have some fantastic materials that I would teach in the name of Michael Coogan. Um, but
Did you ever send him a letter thanking him for what you're telling us now?
I have, yes, yeah, I have. I've talked to him. I email him once in a blue moon.
Mhm.
If I see something interesting about Job, I still have his email address, and I may send him something. He also taught a great class on the Psalms that I took. Um, anyway, that being as it may, my view on the problem of evil is that God gives us the answer in the book of Job, and I really can't fathom what the fuss is about. Nobody deserves anything.
I'm sorry, you mean the whole whirlwind speech, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
nobody deserves anything. The rain falls in the desert where no one's around. The rain is not for you. It's not about you.
Mhm.
Your suffering is not about you. For that matter, your enjoyment is not about you. We live in a wild ecosystem that's beautiful, but it's also wild and it's dangerous, and
Mhm.
nothing's guaranteed there. And we're not so special. We're part of that system.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
it's an ecosystem where nothing's wasted. Things die, and they give substance to the next life that comes up. Nothing's wasted in an ecosystem. Natan Margalit teaches that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, you know, um, so I can't imagine what all the fuss is about the problem of evil, but but the contempt of the strong for the weak is an answer to the problem of evil. It's a bad answer, but it's an answer, and that's one of the reasons it's so tempting, I think, to people. Okay, let's move on a little bit from my crazy diagram. There are going to be more diagrams. Okay. What does it mean when the right wing attacks people for virtue signaling? What is it that they're even saying? Wouldn't it be a good thing to signal that you're virtuous? I mean, some of the same people who accuse me of that are constantly signaling that they are Christian. I mean, what is it that they're even saying? Let's analyze that for a second. Um, I think that this is the voice of the other side. The premise is that there's no such thing as morality, so there's no such thing as virtue. So every claim to virtue is hypocrisy. Such people equate virtue with obedience.
Mhm.
Oh, wait a minute. We have to go back to the crazy diagram for a minute. So teshuvah. Um, Words of curse bring you to the other side, and words of redemption bring you back. And the word of redemption that brings you back from a sin is the compassionate knowledge of the harm caused by the offense.
The harm caused by.
The offense. the compassionate knowledge of the harm caused by the offense. If you can make your soul say that, then you couldn't want anything but to try to do your best to assuage the hurt.
There's a group that that formed a program for prisoners who have committed violent crimes, murder mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And that program was a program where they took 10 of these people in a group and they put them in an area where they were not allowed to make a sound. They had to sit for 10 hours a day and think about what they've done. And the outcome of that was absolutely astounding, because these people, the great majority of them, I won't say all of them, but the great majority of them came to realize the harm that they had done to others and to want to repent it. And what really broke my heart was they took that program out of the prison.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. But it was, to me, it was astounding, that silence and thought, just thought, without any real guidance for it, except that you're here because you did something wrong and we want you to think about it. That they could come to the decision themselves that they had made a terrible mistake.
Mm-hmm. 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 And the teaching is that the gate of repentance is never shut, right? The gate of repentance is never locked. And one thing that I want to suggest is the compassionate knowledge of the harm you caused is one of those gates of repentance.
Yeah.
It's always open. The problem with it is, and I think we get to this later and we should move on, but the problem with it is that if you're so caught up in guilt, the gate of repentance may be too bright to look at. It hurts your eyes. Too bright to look at. And so people shy away from it.
That's the way I felt about my son's death. That the pain was just too much to acknowledge.
Yeah. And that might not be something that was your fault. But if, for people who have done something very, very wrong, the compassionate knowledge of the harm they caused might be too much to hold.
Yeah.
It might not be, it might be too big for them, in which case.
But we had studied that humans are capable of good and evil from the day they're born. And I've always thought that well, since I read about that program, it really brought to me the fact that good and evil can exist at the same time in the same human being, and that it's there and that we can access it ourselves. We don't have to wait for someone to tell us that if we can sit down and think about it, we can access the good and have it conquer the evil.
Right. Because you have to believe that it can. Right. And that's the gate of repentance. So an unrepented sin creates a demon of retribution. And the demon is an angel in disguise. Demons are unpleasant angels. Maybe that's not the Talmudic tradition, but that's one of the things, so you can also have demons who are shadim, and that's fine. But what if at least some demons are nothing but angels with messages that we don't want to hear? And the reason they appear demonic is that we don't want to listen to what it is that their message is that they've been given to give us. And so they're scary, right? I have a whole thing that I wrote about demons of retribution. But you can, through repentance, bring about their angelic side. It's just hard. It's hard to do. It's probably one of the most difficult things we can do. But Samael is the demon of retribution of the original word of curse. And it is possible to conquer that. Not to conquer it, but to turn it. And to make him show his angelic side. And that is the final redemption that we have to work toward by redeeming all the smaller things. But in the end, in the Messianic time, Samael himself is going to be redeemed, and we're going to see his angelic side. Okay. So here we have our Chesed Gevura balance, and when they're in balance, they're great. When they're out of balance, they're not great, but not evil yet. When it's fairly easy to see how imbalanced Gevura can lead to evil. Rage is not always evil. It's dangerous because it can lead to evil, but it's not always evil. Sometimes rage is important, right? Violence, war, I'm not a pacifist. I don't think war is evil necessarily. I think a lot of wars are wrong. But war itself, not always. Sometimes you need war. It's just that it's very, very dangerous because it's out of balance. Okay? It might be less obvious how unbalanced chesed can lead to evil, but it can. Unbalanced chesed on this side is also bad. It's also not where we want to be. You need more gevura if you're in one of these places, right?
Can you give us an example of unbalanced chesed?
Sure. Well, I have this down here. I'll try to think of a specific example, but self-blame for the hurt or self-blame for inaction can be self-justified with despair. This is the way the world is, which is really just a sadder way of saying might makes right.
Well, I can
this is-
think of one when you talk about generosity.
Mhm.
Okay. I know that I experienced this through someone else who literally gave away everything they had and damaged their family.
Yeah, too much chesed is not good. So one of the things, Dov Elboim has this book, Into the Fullness of the Void. One of the founders of Binah, the secular yeshiva in Israel. And he really doesn't like Abraham. And, Dov Elboim says that Abraham has this unbalanced chesed. He doesn't have any gevura. He's a total yes man. He does whatever God says. I think in light of Abraham's argument with God and the destruction of Sodom, I'm not sure I quite agree with Elboim there, but that's his point, that Abraham is a terrible father, because he does whatever God says and doesn't argue back. Certainly in the Akedah, that's that version of Abraham.
Does it say anything about why he was able to argue in the one place and didn't argue for his own son?
Oh gosh, it's been like a decade since I read that book, but I'll have to pick it up again. It's Into the Fullness of the Void. It's a really good book. Elbaum, it's in English Elbaum, Dov Elbaum. Gosh, I see a lot of people in my clinical work who struggle with addiction. And addiction is so related, interrelated with despair. You know, um, and what they're really saying in some cases is, I deserve this. I'm so bad because I got addicted to meth or whatever, um, that now I deserve this life of living on the street and being addicted. I don't deserve better. And so people are punishing themselves, which again is just a sadder way of saying might makes right. Right? Nobody deserves that.
You can see this in abusive situations where, you know, either childhood abuse or low self-esteem, self-worth, getting into relationships that are abusive, physically or emotionally abusive. And I've seen it even morph into getting into sadomasochistic side of life. Way of punishing yourself for being in that abusive situation, or I could have done something better or more. You see that with Holocaust survivors or your people who survived Europe. You know, I could have done something and I didn't. I didn't do enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do we have in our tradition that can deal with that?
Teshuva. I think the forgiveness, Reb Zalman of blessed memory, said that every night we should do the bedtime Shema to clear the God field and of all to reset things so that we start
Everybody knows
at every
about the Hareini Mochel that comes before the Shema, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Reb Zalman had that technology of how do we reset things and be able to get on with our lives with the balance of Chesed and Gevurah.
Yeah. And people like that need more Gevurah. Their Chesed is out of balance. I've used that clinically, and it works pretty well. You just put a little Gevurah into the system.
Yeah,
Ken has his
I
hand up.
just say this that
Yeah.
Tim
Oh, yeah, sure.
had a great analogy. She said, you know, blood is so life giving and important to our body, but it needs to be contained, because if
Right.
you don't, then you have a stroke or you have, you know, bruising or whatever. But you have to have that containment, the balance between Chesed and Gevurah.
Right. 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 Definitely. Yeah, Ken.
In answer to Eve's question, what does our tradition counsel us? I'm thinking of a couple of sayings in Pirkei Avot, where one of the rabbis counsels moderation in all things, and another rabbi says, "Who is rich? He or she, they who are happy with their portion." So that's maybe a corrective against addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Okay. So when Gevurah is out of balance, um, here's what I have to say about Gevurah being out of balance. The danger of approaching the Sitra Achra through anger is like a black hole. In a small black hole, tidal forces would tear you apart before you even get close to the event horizon. The event horizon, you know, is the point of no return in a black hole. You feel the danger very early and it's easy to stay away. In a supermassive black hole, you could be way past the event horizon before even noticing that anything feels different. A black hole always seems to be in front of you, even if you're actually inside of it. So, to me, approaching the other side through anger is just like that. The small situations are fairly easy to avoid, but the big ones really draw us in, and we could be way, way, way past the point of no return before we even notice something went wrong. At which point, no, there's always a return. It's a word, but the curse has been said, and now you have to say a word of redemption, a teshuvah, to come back from it. Okay. So the chesed imbalance is more complicated. Um, it seems to me that there are three choices. I'm just gonna, maybe I have time to read this whole thing. It's interesting to see how excessive chesed leads to where we don't want to be. It doesn't just flip into bad chesed, it goes through gevura to bad gevura, right? That's what I said before. The excessive chesed finds the bad gevura frightening and reacts submissively. In its failure to see or make boundaries, the excessive chesed extends kindness to the bad gevura, not knowing or not wanting to know that the bad gevura has created a situation in which kindness cannot simultaneously be extended to perpetrator and victim. That's what bad gevura does. But kindness to victims requires advocacy and disruption of the bad gevura's status quo. Remember that gated community of niceness. And excessive chesed cannot do that. Excessive chesed thus enables the bad gevura. In fact, bad gevura feeds on excessive chesed for this reason. From here, the excessive chesed has three options. Stay put, self-blame for the inaction, knowing the enabling is wrong, but trapped in despair about it. Miserable, but not evil. The next choice is repent, rebalance. The person can work on themselves by trying to grow in gevura, standing up to wrong, restraining oneself, and learning when to do each or all gevura. And that leads us to our balance point. Or crossover. And this is when self-blame becomes a word of curse. Moral misjudgments begin as self-pity turns to self-justification. Now suddenly rocking the boat is wrong, whereas before it was merely unattainable. Do people see this? Among people who are sufferers, agitators for justice are considered to be rocking the boat. And at first that's unrealistic. And then you get into a point where it's seen as wrong. Kindness is withheld from other victims of bad gevura because to admit other people deserve kindness would be to confess having uttered the curse on oneself. I have to say, I see this all the time in my work with the homeless, all the time.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, perhaps counterintuitively, excessive chesed is transitioned to bad gevura. People treat each other unkindly because if they were to admit that other people in their similar situation deserve kindness, they would have to admit that they have uttered the curse on themselves. That they too deserve kindness and that the situation is wrong. But they don't want to do that because they're trapped in it, because they're take the example of addiction, and it could be addiction to drugs, it could be addiction to bigotry, any kind of addiction. First, the first reaction is self-pity, and then the self-pity turns to self-loathing, and the self-loathing turns to the curse. Might makes right. That's the curse. And once you utter the curse, you have to repent from it if you want to come back. That's a one-way ticket to the other side. And you have to buy the one-way ticket back, which is a word of redemption, a word of repentance. But sooner or later, and it's hard to get the exact moment it happens, but it happens to people, they say the curse on themselves. And then they can't be kind to other people in the same situation because, again, the gate of repentance is too bright to look at. And so you get people who treat each other horrifically, who are all in a similar situation. And if they would come together and resist the real oppression, we could have a better society. But I guess the point here is that sufferers too have a moral choice. And it's possible for them to utter a curse as well as it is for victors. Being a sufferer does not mean that you can't utter a curse, and they do. We do. Maybe a lot of us have done it at some point in our lives. It's something we can repent for if we understand what we did. But I see this constantly. People treat each other in horrible ways because they can't admit that they deserve better. And to admit that the other person deserves better is to admit that they themselves deserve better, and they just can't look at it. I think counseling can help. I mean, if you could reach people through, maybe they end up in jail or they end up in the mental hospital, and you're able to reach them through chaplaincy, I think that can help. But at this point, you're with people who need help, who just can't seem to get back by themselves. Yeah, Chaya.
So my experience is the opposite, that people will treat other people better than they will treat themselves. So, it's teaching in chaplaincy or counseling, teaching people how to be kind to themselves, turn that chesed that they have for other people and turn it into themselves.
Yeah. Very often, right? It's not that everybody has the same path, but very often, yeah, people can. Self-forgiveness for that reason is so important, right? The person who hasn't self-forgiven is going to have an awful time being kind to others. And that's why, like I said, I see this constantly. If we can help people get from our chaplaincy, if we can help people get to a place of self-forgiveness, then they're going to join the ranks of those who, like Chaya's experience, treat people better than they treat themselves. But if they haven't forgiven themselves, very often, not always, but often, they project their contempt for themselves onto others. So it's one of the places I think where chaplaincy can really, really help.
Would you consider giving a session or a course to chaplains on running something like this, say the month of Elul?
Maybe, yeah. Here we're almost done, but I have 3:57 here, so let's move on, and I hope to get you out of here as close to on time as possible. So here's where the chesed sort of crashes to the ground. This is the whole quote from Dante. This is my favorite quote from Dante. Should I read it? I don't know if we have time. All right, I'll read it. I'll read it. It's so beautiful. The soul which is created apt to love is mobile unto everything that pleases, soon as by pleasure she is waked to action. Your apprehension from some real thing an image draws, and in yourselves displays it, so that it makes the soul turn unto it. And if when turned towards it she incline, love is that inclination, it is nature, which is by pleasure bound in you anew, that even as the fire doth upward move, by its own form, which to ascend is born, where longest in the matter it endures, so comes the captive soul into desire, which is a motion spiritual and ne'er rests until she doth enjoy the thing beloved. Now may apparent be to thee how hidden the truth is from those people who aver all love is in itself a laudable thing, because its matter may perchance appear aye to be good, but yet not each impression is good, albeit good may be the wax. Right? So not all chesed is good. Chesed is definitely good wax, but not every impression in it is good. And here's where Gevura sort of crashes on the ground. That I call the machinery of death. Need to sort of develop that more, but people locked into us versus them thinking, which spreads like a virus. Heaven knows we see this in our world today. Okay. On the other side, there's no balance. Remember, bad chesed is a mirror image through bad gevura. There's no balance there. It's not a balanced tree. there's no tension or drama. So I said, for example, gated communities of niceness serve tyranny directly. There's no opposition there. And unfortunately, those two bring us down to the Sitra Achra of Tiferet, which is like fake teshuva. I put, I'm sorry that you felt. Perpetrators playing victims, perpetrators become victims, victims become perpetrators. Heaven knows we see this all the time. I'll read this little thing. Honor and authority are faked here because the Sitra Achra fails to understand them. They may certainly be real in the sense that they are used by bad Gevura to create real problems in the world, but they are frauds of Tiferet, inauthentic knockoffs that any human can tell. I can't quite read that. That any human can tell are frauds. So that's how that works, and this is my end. Somebody needs to say a word of redemption.
Magical thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate this teaching. It was very meaningful and moving. And yes, we will get you back on during Hillel to do a part 2.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thank you for having me. It's really an honor to help out in this way at the RPA, and I hope that this made any sense.
It did. All too well.
Provoking thought.
Yeah.
I don't think we should wait until Elul.
You tell me when you think we should hire him again. All right. Lila Tov, everybody. Shavua Tov.
I just want to say, Jeremy, if nothing else, it's a whole different perspective on Isaac.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
I mean, it's like, I'm like,
It,
wow.
it was beautiful. It was
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank
I
you.
mean, it was, yeah, there was lots of stuff there, but like just to like, absorb that and to like let that feed for a while, like, because, it's just so counterproductive to, what I've learned my whole life,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a different
So
perspective.
so I'm really grateful for it,
Yeah,
because a lot of things, I think that it adds to a lot of understanding of, of victimizing.
Yeah.
yeah,
Makes
thank-
sense. Makes the world make sense. So Lila Tov, everybody go have dinner.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you,
Shalom.
everybody.